Yes, sir.
right there. He's going to be doing the presentation.
Okay.
Gene Nagel.
There's you want to go. I chose that. It might be all right now. Go over right side by
Over there.
Yes, sir. Here we are. So Andy just.
Larry?
Yes, that's why.
Step up. Man, that looks better. All right, we've got two new people coming into the Fallen Club, and it gives me great pleasure to give this stuff to you. Larry, I'm going to give you your stuff right now. It says, whereas been designated qualified U.S. submarine for more than 50 years. You didn't know you're that old, did you? Remember, U.S. submarine veterans are good standing, and then I send them to the Holland Club. This is your turn.
Thank you.
And this is for your vet.
Should have one there.
And here's the challenge coin.
Oh, very nice. Thank you. Oh,
Okay. And Kelvin,
great. That's a.
we got the same stuff for you.
Oh, that's good. We had chocolates together.
We gotta present this first. Okay. And it says where has been having a qualified submarine. A lot of veterans in good standing. We probably get into the hall.
Thank you very much. I'm very proud of it.
And a patch and a challenge coin.
I'm not giving that on anything.
No. Now stick your hand.
Separate picture for you.
Here you go.
Next to John.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, Holland Club assemble at the table.
Not taking home. Where we're supposed to go last year. Okay.
Hey, Myra, can you get you to take a picture on your Holland Club? The guys back there? It's pretty much it's out the American.
Hey,
Sure, I haven't been doing it. I don't know how we're not sticking that thing.
Okay, let's go ahead and
Turn this off.
okay, let's go ahead and call the order of the meeting. If you would please stand. Larry, would you like to lead us in the pledge of allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Myra. Sorry.
It's like from my other hat. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for getting us all together here tonight on this cool Colorado night, rainy night. I thank you for the two new people that are standing at the table in the back. I thank you for their service to the country and for their willingness to do that. And I just ask that you would bless our meeting tonight, that you'd be here with us and you would help us conduct our business as necessary and be with us as we socialize and have a fun time. Amen.
USS Creed, USSVI Creed, to perpetuate the memory of our shipmates who gave their lives in pursuit of their duties while serving their country. That their dedication, deeds, and supreme sacrifice be a constant source of motivation towards greater accomplishments. We pledge loyalty and patriotism to the United States of America and its Constitution. Please remain standing for the tolling of the votes. USS Corvina, SF-226, lost on 16 November 1943 during a Japanese submarine attack off of Turk. 82 men lost. USS Sculpin, SF-191, lost on 19 November 1943 when it was sunk by a Japanese warship north of Oruk Island near Turk. 2 died during the attack, 20 more died as POWs, and 21 men survived the war. 43 men lost. USS Albacore, SS-218, lost on 7 November 1944, possibly by Japanese mine between Hansu and Okuri, Japan. 85 men lost. USS Growler, SS-215, lost on 8 November 1944 by a possible Japanese surface attack in the South China Sea. 86 men lost. USS Scamp, SS-277, lost probably on 16 November 1944 for progressive damage in a multiple air and sea attack east of Tokyo Bay. 83 men lost. In keeping with the USSVI creed, let us remain in a mood of reverence and respect while we take a moment to remember those submariners who have received their final orders and are now serving on eternal patrol. Rocky Mountain Base, eternal patrol list for November. Thomas Utley, 11/24/2019. Please be seated. Holland Club, toast. I'm going to do dive. You remember how to do that one? Push the fingers and then forward. For most submariners, the submerged submarine provides a quiet and somewhat tranquil setting, free from many of the distractions present in the everyday surface world. So in keeping with that, let's take her down for a regular meeting. Clear the bridge. Take me down. Dive. Dive. Thank you. No. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start right in. Our speaker for this meeting is Robert. If you have questions, just hold them till the end. He's back. Explain an incident you went through back in '73, right? Very, very interesting. And Robert.
I think we all know there's a couple of sea stories that the sailors come up with. Some of them begin with once upon a time. And in the interest of mixed company, the other one sort of goes like,
No shit.
yeah, Hong Kong, no shitter. This is neither one. This is the true story. This Christmas Eve, it'll be 50 years since I went through this, along with my shipmates on USS John Marshall. SSBN 611, and we were the Gold Crew. John Marshall, a little history on her. She was built in 61, commissioned 62, and did patrols out of Holyloch, Scotland, in Rota, Spain, and eventually in Guam. Then she was converted to an SSN and carried the SEAL delivery vehicles. And upper level missile compartment was converted to SEAL berthing. And they used the head in the missile compartment middle level. But she also did a lot of stuff during Desert Storm, in the Persian Gulf and a couple of other places. There's a couple of facts here that I want to make sure is clear to everybody. I'm a firm believer in observing OPSEC. But to understand the gravity of what we faced that night, Christmas Eve of 1973, I am going to specify a couple of depths. John Marshall was a 1,300-foot boat for test depth. She's been gone now 30 years, and I can safely say I'm comfortable saying that. The maximum depth that we went to is pretty significant. Anyway, I don't have any fancy diagrams or anything. This is just a story. But it's a tribute, I think, to the qualification standards of the United States Navy submarine force. Those were established a long time ago, and we all observed them. I'm a little uncomfortable today about the qualification standards in the Navy today, the submarine force. It has me somewhat concerned. I'm sure the people out there are doing a great job, but there's only one reason I'm still here today, and that was because 93% of that crew wore dolphins, officer and enlisted. The story goes, and I'll start it pretty much early in the day on the 24th of December, 1973. The decision was made to do a battery equalizer charge. The battery equalizer charge, as you all know, takes a long time. The battery is basically taken down to nothing in terms of its charge, and then is recharged over a period of time. I can't remember specifics of how long that was. I think it's 12 or 14 hours, something in that neighborhood. Maybe an electrician in here knows that better than I do. On that Christmas Eve, we were about 220 miles northeast of Murmansk in the Barents Sea. We had to do our patrols that close in simply because we carried the old Polaris A2 missile. She only had a 1,500-mile range. Carried a single 1.2 megaton W-47 warhead on it. To be within range of some of our targets in the Soviet Union, all of our patrols were done in the Barents, or off of Svalbard Island and a couple of other places. That day was a normal day underway at sea. We'd already been at sea for about 7 weeks, I think. The cooks had really put together a surfing turf for that night. Throughout the previous 3 weeks to this, we had been in extremely heavy seas. Normal patrol depth was around 250 feet or so. Because we had the trailing wire antenna that had to stream out behind the boat, and we received our VLF, or very low frequency broadcasts, on that wire. We got sports cores and we got ship traffic, classified and otherwise. We have been taking for about 3 weeks straight, anywhere from 20 to 25 to 30-degree rolls on a pretty constant basis. Sea state up above was anywhere from 25 to 30 feet initially. Then after 3 weeks, the real guts of the storm hit us up top. And we were fighting 65 to 70-foot seas in the Barrens. We were taking it at times 45 and 50-degree rolls, pitching up and down 15 to 20 degrees. It was a very, very rough conditions. The cook still put together that Christmas Eve a decent dinner of lobster tails and steak. How the hell they did it, I have no idea, but they did it. I was up and typically I ate my dinner. It was about 5:30 in the evening on that Christmas Eve. Uh, I ate my dinner and then I always like to go back to the missile compartment. I stood launcher supervisor watches, launcher station and that class of boat was starboard side missile compartment, middle level. 3 decks in the missile compartment, 3 decks in the operations compartment. To give you a little visual, the fan room with what we call an induction sump was right opposite the wardroom. The wardroom was on the port side, pantry was there, officer staterooms were on the port side, middle up. The fan room was on the starboard side, and there was a lot of being operations with the berthing compartment. And also the missile control center was down there. I relieved the watch after my normal walkthrough of the missile compartment that night, which I like to do. I like to check a few gauges here and there, misleading and cooling gauges up in machinery one upper level. And I went ahead and relieved the watch. At 18:16 hours, and I will never forget that, on the 1MC, which is the ship's general announcing system, I heard reactor scram, rig shift for reduced electrical. And I'm like, what the hell are they doing? A drill? Christmas Eve? But it wasn't a drill. They had experienced an actual reactor casualty back at. There's 4 groups of rods on top of the reactor, and one rod on one of the groups had inexplicably dropped, and at that point we didn't know why. They followed it up with a group scram and then a full scram of the reactor. And again, we're at 250 feet at typical patrol speed of about 4 knots, 3 to 4 knots. And the decision obviously had to be made to go to periscope depth and try to snorkel. Snorkeling in a nuke boat means sticking a mast up to bring in fresh air from outside so that we could run the diesel engine. And a big old, we used to call it a rock crusher. It was a big Fairbanks Morse diesel engine, vacuum machinery too. That induction mast that we stick up had what we call a head valve on the top of it. And there's 3 electrodes in there. And if seawater touches any 2 of those 3 electrodes, it triggers a pneumatic system to shut the head valve to prevent water from coming into the boat. The first indication I had of a problem, sitting at launcher about 15 feet, 20 feet maybe aft of the missile compartment forward bulkhead into operational compartment, was I heard the fan room door slam open. And then the sound of running water.
lots of running water. The guys in lower level operations, uh, first of all, let me back up a little bit. I went forward around tube number one, missile tube number one, and there was a cascade of water coming over the coaming, the hatch coaming, between the operations department into the missile department. And there was water pouring out of all the ventilation ducts in the overhead of the missile department. And I got a hold of the chief of watch on the JA, and I called him and said it was flooding in the missile department and operation. At that point, I slammed the watertight door shut and closed the ventilation flapper valve. And went back to launcher and got on the 35 MC and told my missile department road patrol, a young man by the name of Bill Hone. He was on the very, very first patrol. This was my 8th patrol on the Marshall. And called him the launcher to get him to secure the missile compartment better and start working for reduced electrical. We had the 5 and 6 SB buses in the missile compartment. There's a bunch of circuit breakers on there that had to be thrown, and systems shut down to preserve electrical power, because at that point, we were trying to run the diesel. And again, and this was at 65 to 70 foot seas. On that class of boat, typically going to periscope depth, we would flood anywhere from 15 to 25,000 pounds of water in depth control tanks, and then pump that water to forward trim, the auxiliaries, and after trim to put a 5-degree up bubble on that boat and ring up a standard bell, which is about 8 to 10 knots to plane and help the boat stay up at periscope depth. In that sea state, we flooded in that night 45,000 pounds of water into depth control and then pumped water around to try to hold the boat down. Because you remember, we were only 200 miles off the northern Russian coast. And doing all of our patrols in that area was always a fiasco, because there was a lot of Russian surface activity and a lot of Russian submarine activity. The Victor class fast attacks and a few of the other Russian submarines they had were constantly pestering us. It was very hard to remain undetected. Oftentimes we would rig as many as 5 or 6 times a week for ultra quiet, which is how you sort of do to keep quiet and stay away from the surface traffic and the submarine traffic. Within 5 minutes or less, I knew that we were in trouble, deep trouble, because the diesel had shut down, because as the induction air came in, when the head valve up top failed to shut, it flooded the whole fan room, the plenum, and a lot of the water made it back to the diesel and flooded the diesel out. Shut the diesel dead down. We figured later on, I know I talked to Captain Fuller about this, and he's still alive. I saw him at our reunion in 2021, and we had extensive discussions about the events of that night. And he and the XO and a couple of diving officers on board, chief petty officers, estimated we brought in anywhere from 55 to 60,000 pounds of water into that boat. A lot of the water made it into lower level operations. The guys that had been asleep down there were using mattresses and blankets and pillows to try to keep water away from the battery well hatches. If salt water gets into that battery, we're cooked. We're done. That can cause fires, it can cause explosions, etc. With chlorine gas. It's very, very toxic, very hazardous to the crew. as things progressed, with the diesel down, and you had about, say, 60,000 pounds of water into that boat. We had water up to the deck plates in lower level missile compartment bilges. Machinery two, the water was over the deck plates in lower level machinery two. We started sinking stern first with no power, no propulsion, nothing, at about a 30 to 35 degree up angle. Now remember, I said that this was a 1,300-foot boat. That was our test depth. That used to be classified, I don't know if it is or not, but to understand the gravity of the situation, I'm going to tell you what the test depth was. It was 1,300 feet on that boat. Passing through 800 feet, still headed down at a pretty good clip. Captain Fuller gave the order to emergency blow the main ballast tanks. There's 3 ballast tanks forward, 1A and B, 2A and B, 3A and B, and then 3 tanks aft, 4A and B, 5A and B, and 6A and B. We started blowing the water out of these tanks, passing through 800 feet. And the emergency blow kept going, and we weren't going anywhere. We were still sinking. Passing through about 11 or 1,200 feet, I told Bill Hone, my rover, I said, go down to the lower level missile compartment. On the starboard side up in the overhead, there's a valve down there called, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. And it's KHP58. It's a cross connect valve to missile compartment air bottles. There's 16 missile tubes, and there's 16 air bottles, each of them 33 cubic feet of air, each of them holding the 33 cubic feet at 4,500 psi. I told him to open that valve, and I called the chief of the watch, and I told him that I'd given him that air also. I got my ass chewed later by the XO for opening that valve because in his interpretation, it removed our ability to launch missiles. Because on that system, on the Mark 17 launcher system, we didn't use gas generators. We used the air bottles through a poppet valve system and an eject blocking valve system. If we had to launch a bird, the fire control initiated the fire command. It would blow the eject blocking valve open, and it would in turn route air to the poppet valve. The poppet valve would open and dump that 33 cubic feet of air underneath the missile and pump the missile out of the tube. That was the purpose of having that air there. He was concerned about our future ability, if we got the situation under control, to launch missiles. I basically told the XO, that is the least of our problems right now, sir. And Captain Fuller fortunately backed me up on that. Told the XO to go stay room and go to sleep. In opening that valve, it gave the chief of the watch and the emergency blow capability, because we were starting to exhaust our emergency blow capability in all of the bottles that were in the ballast tanks to blow water out of the ballast tanks to try to get the boat into a positive buoyancy. We ended up, and this is the scary part. Still going down. Bill was sitting there launching with me, and the tears were running down the side of his face. And a 20-year-old kid, hell of a nice kid, good missile tech, but he was young. And he said, "Are we going to die?" And I looked him square in the face, and I said, "Don't worry about it. You won't feel a thing." I don't think he ever forgave me for that.
But we ended up with the digital launch, the digital depth gauge on the forward side of launcher panel number 1. When we stopped, our downward momentum was reading 80 up angle. I am convinced that the engine room and machinery 2 was well below crush depth. So we started back up. We did make it to the surface, and I thought that the worst was over with, but it wasn't. For 4.5 days, we spent on the surface with a couple of Russian Kreska-class cruisers next to us and a Cashin-class destroyer. And all 3 ships, of course, were offering their undying assistance and help. And Captain Fuller basically told them, what they could do.
Tell them about the battery.
Oh yeah, the battery. That's the worst part of it. Because we had done the equalizer charge,
You're still doing equalizing. You're only 3 hours into the equalizing charge, right?
yeah, about 3 hours into the equalizer charge, what meant that when the event occurred, we didn't have much in the battery at all. The battery lasted about 3 to 4 hours after we made it to the surface. And from that point on out for 4 days, a little over 4 days, we had no power in the boat. All we had was battle lanterns and flashlights. No heaters, nothing. The water temperature outside on the main injection was about 21 to 22 degrees. We ended up with about anywhere from 8 to 10 inches of ice in all the bilges. The inside of the boat got down to about 36, 37 degrees. And of course, we're rolling 60, 70 degrees to port and starboard, pitching up and down 25 to 30 degrees. I know in 2021, when I talked to Captain Fuller, he told me that he and the XO had a discussion of what they could do, if anything, because at various points, the boat actually ended up, most of the time we'd wallow in the troughs of the waves. But at a couple of points there, the boat actually ended up bow on the crest of one wave and stern on the crest of another wave. He says that they could actually, through the number 1 periscope, actually see light under the hull. And they were really concerned the boat would break her back. And if it broke her back, which means the keel, the boat would have been lost, along with all of us. None of us would have survived that, especially in the water temperatures that we were looking at. Randy Tom Cullen and a guy by the name of Rod Case, and one of our ELTs made the initial reactor entry. And they did that within less than an hour after we made it to the surface. Those of you that are nuclear trained would understand how hot the reactor compartment was, both in terms of temperature and in terms of neutron radiation and gamma.
No ventilation.
And no ventilation. They made the RC entry, and Captain Fuller told them no more than 10 to 15 minutes inside the RC. It became very apparent right away why the rod had dropped. There was corrosion on a rod motor ground strap. The ground strap was broken off because of corrosion. It had broken off the rod drive motor, causing the rod drive motor to lose its ground, and it dropped. That's what precipitated the whole thing.
Randy, Tom Calla, Rod Case. They ended up working on the diesel engine. And this is a feat that I still don't know how they did it. But they worked 96 hours straight without sleep to drain and flush the contaminated oil out of the diesel engine. They rebuilt the fuel racks on the diesel and got the diesel engine running finally after 96 hours. We ended up charging our battery up as much as we could and using the diesel to obviously get the reactor going again. By that time, at the end of 4.5 days, the seas had settled down to around 20 to 25 feet. We were able to get the reactor running again, and we ended up submerging and headed back to Groton, Connecticut. I tended to be at that age, I was 25 years old, maybe a little bit too much of a smart mouth. But I told the XO, I said, you know, I guess we're not going to need those missile launching systems, are we? He and I never did get along anyway, so it wasn't any great loss. But we made it back to Groton, Connecticut, and we docked at State Pier, and we were a week and a half late getting into Groton. Families came down, we met our families and stuff, and the first thing they did the following morning was they put the boat in the dry dock over Electric Boat Shipping Harbor. And it was in there for 3.5, almost 4 weeks. We turned the boat over to the Blue Crew, and they ended up x-raying that hull. That boat was made at Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock. And I am forever grateful to Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock because that boat sustained little to no damage. The only damage we had was the starboard fairwater plane was a little whacked out of shape from getting slammed with waves that were much taller than that boat. Some of the plating on the stern planes and the rudders, you had a top rudder and a bottom rudder in the stern planes. The plating on there had been pressured in around the framework there, and you could see cupping throughout the stern planes and the rudders, probably from the water pressure that is sustained. I think the XO was pissed off at this too, but Captain Fuller awarded me the Navy Commendation Medal. And I'm very proud of that. Because he says if I hadn't opened up AHP 58, we may not have made it. And one of the points that he made at our reunion in 2021 in Kissimmee, Florida, was that there was only 2 boats in the history of the nuclear Navy that had been as deep or went deeper than we did. Neither one of them returned. And that was Scorpion and Thresher. We made it back, as I said, only because of the qualification level of that crew. Every single man in that boat did his job to the best of his ability. And I'm forever grateful to that crew for being here. There's only about 40 of us left from that crew that we determined, and because Captain Fuller had a whole list of everybody that was on that crew. And he and I and several of the other guys that were on the boat at the time, we went through the list to the best of our ability, doing Google searches and that type of thing. We determined there's only about 40 of us left from the 130 guys that were on that boat. And uh, that was an experience that shaped my life in ways that I never anticipated, but I'm grateful for. I still struggle every Christmas Eve. Ask Marcia. I have nightmares, significant nightmares, kicking and screaming nightmares. And I hope someday just to get over them and get beyond it. But I don't know why it is, but every Christmas Eve I go through that. Um, in any case, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Go ahead, Cal.
Two questions. One is the louder cow.
Need the mic.
Louder. Okay, two questions. One is the arm that broke off within the reactor.
It's a ground strength, Cal.
Did they,
You're like under a speaker.
You're right under the speaker, that's why.
go ahead, like this?
Oh.
There you go. So the ground strap, did they look at that? And when it went into the 3 weeks where they had to overhaul and repair things, did they look at that, to see what if there were reasons for that? And if those reasons, could be then applied to how they and how often they reevaluated the reactors to see that this never happened to other boats, nuclear submarines. And the other question was, what happened to the executive officer in his career? And did he ever apologize for having the accent on the wrong syllable?
Cal, I don't know a lot of the details about that XO. He left the boat at the same time I did. I went to the George Washington Carver. They had a missile tech that was killed in a traffic accident. And they needed an MT like yesterday. I'd only been back and forth less than 30 days. And the John Marshall was going to go to overhaul at Mare Island shipyard anyway. And I volunteered to go to the Carver simply because they needed an MT and I knew the gun boss on there really well. His name was Pete Martin. And I figured it was what I could do. Now, as far as the ground strap, I know that there were some observations by the supervisor of shipbuilding at DB that had to be a maintenance issue that they looked at on a regular basis, because the bottom line was there was very piss poor maintenance done. That ground strap should never have corroded as bad as it did for apparently as long as it did without being detected. So I think it probably had to be a maintenance issue after that. I don't know for a fact. But the whole everything in retrospect is the proverbial domino game. It wasn't just one failure. It was multiple failures that compounded the situation. And that oftentimes is the reason why boats and ships have problems. One failure is not going to kill a submarine, but multiple failures damn near killed us that night. Go ahead, JJ.
A couple questions. When all this happened, were you able to communicate with submarine authorities and tell them what was happening?
Yeah, Captain Fuller had been communicating until we lost power. I don't know if radio has backup power batteries or anything like that. I was never privy to any of that. But he did advise ComSubland that we were in deep trouble.
And were they of any help and guidance? I would think in with terminal reactor uh, problems that NR would be giving you some guidance on that. Uh, and how did they finally resolve that? Did they replace the ground strap or?
Yes, we repaired and replaced the ground strap.
Yeah, the
They had to grind it down because the corrosion and rust on it was so bad. They had to grind it down to bare steel and then replace the ground strap.
I just as an observation, I don't having had to do a reactor compartment entry at sea. Uh, uh, I don't recall that there was any inspections that you did in the reactor compartment other than when you might have been going in for some other reason. And I'm surprised that there would be corrosion down there. I mean,
Yeah, you wouldn't think.
yeah, I mean, unless there was some kind of leakage of some
There had to have
fluid.
been.
Yeah.
I never did find out if there was. I know that Chuck is now 78 years old, and I don't know if it's related, but he is suffering from terminal stage 4 cancer, brain cancer, esophageal cancer, thyroid cancer. I don't know if it's related. And he and I have talked several times over the last couple of weeks because I'm trying to refresh my mind about a lot of the details. One of my fears is that this story, I felt, and I still feel, it needs to be related at some level. I'm incapable of writing. I can't write anymore because of my shoulder injury and stuff. Um, it before I get too old and I lose grasp of the details, I wanted to tell the story. It's important to me to do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, was the battery so low that you never even thought about using the EPM?
In that sea state, the EPM would have been totally ineffective.
Yeah, with the battery.
With the battery down as low as it was, because like I said, once we got to the surface, the battery lasted less than 3 hours.
But I was just curious, they didn't even consider that then.
No.
So when you hit the jigger and you got the HP blow, would because you needed the additional air you sent in, so because it could not overcome the amount of pressure, or did you not have enough air to blow water?
Well, the deeper you go, the water pressure increases.
Right.
That includes the water pressure inside the ballast tanks.
Right.
To try to drive that volume of water out the scuppers in the bottom of the ballast tanks requires an increasing amount of pressure. But we had the chicken switches open from 800 feet down as we were sinking. And of course, the bottles, the emergency main ballast tank blow bottles that are in the ballast tanks, I think there was 12 or 14 of them forward, 12 or 14 aft. The pressure in those bottles kept getting less and less and less as the air pressure drained out of those bottles. When I opened AHP 58 and gave them all of missile air, and then through the cross connects between the 4,500 psi system and the emergency main ballast tank blow system, there's a cross connection in the torpedo room and the machinery 2 in the engine room. So that's how they were able to maintain the emergency main ballast tank blow and get the water out of the tanks by using all of missile air to get it out. And we exhausted most of missile air to get the water out of the tanks and get going back to the surface.
And you were very heavy. I mean, you had all that.
We're extremely heavy. We couldn't use it. We had no drain pump, no trim pump. We couldn't get wood. We could not get rid of water. And when you're sinking at a 35 to 40 degree up angle, stern first with no propulsion. I mean, you're way outside of the safe operating envelope. It was a very nasty affair. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's into that and eat cake.
Yes. Okay, let's go ahead and take a 10-15 minute break, then we'll finish the rest of the meeting.